Is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? You know, you're an entrepreneur, you've got a glass, go and sell it. Let somebody else fill it up.
What sort of a mindset and leadership approach comes into that?
How do you train and develop your mind to see opportunity?
Opportunity exists where consumers are experiencing pain.
All right, guys, welcome to the Superior Digital Show. I'm here today with Era, who is our Director of Development, myself, Jonathan DeCollibus, Director of the company Superior Digital, and I'm joined today, here's our fourth podcast with Mr. Mike HENEBERY, who is the founder of the company Exit Valhalla, the author of the book, Wrestling with Unicorns. And we're joined today with we can call him the secret CEO of Exit Valhalla, Mr. Stephen SUMNER. This is our second podcast with Stephen. Our first podcast will be linked in the description below. Click and watch if you haven't watched that yet. I've received more positive feedback from that particular podcast than any other one we've ever done before. It's on the topic of leveraging and building. Today's topic really is going to be placed into Mike, into Stephen's hands when we really enter the topic of cloning unicorns. How do you take a unicorn? How do you take an idea and take it all the way to that billion-dollar valuation, that craved and coveted position of unicorns? So Mike, Stephen, over to you. How do we clone a unicorn?
Well, you need some magic unicorn dust, really, John. And the more of that magic unicorn dust you've got, the more you can clone these unicorns. And to be honest, I think it depends on your outlook. It depends on where you see yourself. And equally, there is an element of serendipity, but I think, I'm a believer that serendipity is something that you find as opposed to serendipity finding you. So cloning unicorns is a chapter in Mike's book that I've contributed to. And I'm not really going to go into too much detail on this particular podcast because we need to save some goodies for a later stage. But at the moment, it seems like I'm about to be incubating my third unicorn in less than 6 months, which I have to say has left me breathless, amazed, in awe, and pretty bloody excited at the same time. So the route to doing unicorns is there's no blueprint for it. And I think if you set out on a mission to become a unicorn, chances are you're probably not going to succeed. In the same way that if you set out to disrupt an industry, a business sector, your competitors, chances are you're not really going to succeed. Most of the unicorns that I've studied and looked at focus on one key thing, really, which is the same thing that I heavily focused on, which is what problems are you solving that are big enough to create that opportunity that will bring the unicorn status with it. So it's a slight different approach. And we are, for one of our unicorns, disrupting by, not by design, more by the development and growth of the business. Three of the biggest brands that most people in the world will know, which is Google, YouTube, and Amazon. And we didn't set out to disrupt those businesses. We set out to solve what I recognize was a fairly significant problem some 6 to 7 years ago. So as a result of taking that approach, which we'll go into a little bit later, we've managed to sort of look at what we've built and what problems we're solving. And actually, in the same way that we described in the previous podcast on leverage and growth, we sort of said, okay, where else could we take this particular opportunity and innovate it into other sectors and other market opportunities. And by definition, we've actually created another two unicorns. And the danger is that I'm now an adrenaline junkie on unicorn juice. And everywhere I look now, I'm seeing unicorns, which is either I'm in a permanent hallucinogenic state or a permanent state of euphoria after 6 months of a roller coaster. So pretty exciting times, really good stuff. All sounds wonderful, but it is very much based on the good old leverage and growth strategy that we discussed in our previous podcast. I have a saying which Mike, who you're going to speak to in a moment, heard probably for the first time today, which was my view and this statement. Not everybody understands straight away, and which is, I'm a believer that if you're asking somebody to do certain things and taking your advice, you should be seen to be eating your own dog food. And what I mean by that is the obvious, that if I'm going to ask you to do something, that you would need to evidence that I've been able to do it and to deliver it. And the reasons for that are manifold, but by and large, it helps to move the belief dial that much further forward. So a lot of what we're doing is very much based on the same principles of leverage and growth. So taking what you're currently doing, looking at your assets, your resources, the skill base, and seeing whether or not there's other opportunities that you've yet to uncover, and build a route towards those. The reason we've been able to do it in 6 months, and as I say, the third one is just being uncovered, and we're incubating that as we speak, is down to what is probably a 1 in 100-year opportunity, which is this global pandemic. And so I'll reveal a little bit more later on. I don't want to sort of give away too much at the moment, but essentially, if you've seen the Leverage and Growth podcast, a lot of this will make sense to you. If not, we'll still refer to it throughout this podcast. And by all means, you guys throw any questions at me that you feel are relevant. And Mike and I are collaborating on a number of things, and particularly with a new venture that we've been looking at setting up. And I'm pretty convinced that therein lies the potential for us to incubate a number 4 unicorn. So over to Mike.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I've got to say that Stephen's absolutely right. There is no magic sauce here, but I think what we should be cognizant of was something that we referred to in the last podcast around innovation, that the level of disruption that's going on around us right now is greater than it's ever been. So disruption in every sector, disruption everywhere geographically. In other words, disruption is now ubiquitous. Of course, to make the most of the opportunities that that's throwing up still requires risk-taking, which we also referred to last time around. And it definitely requires thinking outside of the box, which I think is something that Stephen particularly brings to any given situation. When it comes to leveraging your resources, as a private equity guy, I always begin with management rather than the sort of necessarily the intrinsic assets in the business. And to some extent, as also referred to recently, I see a big switch during my career from the business icons of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the guys that I looked up to when I was learning the ropes as an accountant in the late 80s, early 90s, Lord Hanson, Lord White. What were they doing? Principally, they were leveraging assets, they were leveraging balance sheets. Whereas now, I think the opportunity is much more about leveraging intellectual property, whether that's software, whether it's some other kind of goodwill or intangible asset. And because of the degrees of disruption that exist around us right now, the ability and the opportunities for creating new intellectual property are greater than they've ever been. When it comes to leveraging your management, though, I still think that businessmen that create successful unicorns can only do that if they're good at managing people and getting the best out of their team and motivating their team and creating this culture of innovation that we referred to last time around too. Because if you're not innovating, you're dying, as we said before.
Yeah, something, I mean, both Mike and Stephen particularly brought up as well. You mentioned the role of serendipity in building a unicorn there. One thing bit of news I've been fascinating is you obviously know that young Gymshark, the young kid who created that clothing apparel, and the other day he was valued at $1 billion. I'm very curious, obviously, aside from serendipity, obviously, I mean, this kid probably didn't even dream of taking that to unicorn level, but now he's probably competing with Nike, Adidas, and the likes. Someone like that in particular, some young guy like that, what sort of mindset and leadership approach comes into that?
So I'll just take initial response back on that, because I know the story and I know the guy that you're alluding to. So Ben, at the age of 19, was working like most entrepreneurs on an idea that he had. And in order to literally put food on the table, he was also operating as a pizza delivery boy. And that was really allowing him to keep going. But he had a view that the old world order of fitness apparel was and still is held by some of the global brands that we all know of. What his view was to create a brand in the fitness apparel sector. But what he spotted was that the distribution model for some of those global brands was very much based in 20th century mindset. And because of the age that he's at, because of the peers that he's with, because he's connected very much into consumer behavior, which is primarily driven by social media, and also the advent and the rise of social commerce, he recognized that actually there was a much bigger and better way to scale his brand, to get reach on his brand and improve the distribution side. And his is literally a saying that we have in the UK, a back of a fag package story, i.e. something scribbled on a piece of paper, but with a really burning belief that he could deliver a product around and solve a problem that would appeal to his generation of today. And whether you can teach that, whether you're born with it, I'm not really qualified enough to say, but I do know that we're all born and grow up with a certain amount of innate skills. And as we grow, we learn more about what those innate skills are, and we then craft them, fine-tune them. It's one of the reasons why when we all go to school or college, there's a sort of a general curriculum that gives you a broad base of everything, but some of us lean more towards maybe the technical side or the creative side or the numbers side. That's an innate skill. And I don't know why we have that, but effectively your bias is towards the bits that you feel more comfortable about, that you can actually make a contribution to. And I think the story that you just mentioned about Ben is precisely that. He had innate skills around what I would see and say is a really good commercial trading mentality. But above all, he was into fitness. So that was his passion. And he looked around and thought, these big guys don't really get us young guys. What can we do? And so, yeah, great story. He's 25 now, and he's just had 20% of his business acquired by a large US VC firm that created the valuation of $1 billion. He's still holding on to 70% of that. And he's one of those guys that is lucky enough to have hit the headlines. But I'm aware of many Gymsharks that are knocking around, and they're all about to surface. And I think that the opportunity to accelerate growth is available to everybody, and at no time in previous history has the opportunity to be able to do that better than it is now. Now, it may well be different in another 5 to 10 years, but primarily the advent and the take-up of social media has made a big difference. There is now, I was reading stats the other day, there's over 60% of the world's population on one social media platform or another. Now, so the days when you created your website to sell your stuff and spent a lot of money trying to get people to your website is still relevant to a certain extent, but it's almost akin to where we used to go to the physical stores not too long ago, because there was no choice other than to do that via either mail order or through a physical retail outlet. Then the internet arrived, and everybody jumped on the e-commerce bandwagon. Well, the second wave that Ben's picked up is the social media push, the fact that he can connect into people all over the world by leveraging the social media platforms, and also then the innovations from a technical perspective, which allows people not only now to just see pictures on Instagram or Facebook, but to actually place their order there and then. So, that is somebody who had an innate skill set around trading, but also he's come to realize that one of the things that he was doing that he didn't perhaps realize in the first instance is he noticed a huge shift in behavior, and he capitalized on that opportunity. And that's where makes the difference between a great idea not really making it and maybe sometimes what seems to be an average idea go and explode, because you're seeing the opportunity that maybe somebody else isn't.
On the one hand, I completely agree with you. There cannot be a real blueprint where, if you could just follow these 10 easy steps, then you're going to become a unicorn. And I get that, because if that were true, if it was that simple and that direct, probably everybody would be, owning their own unicorn. I think as I'm following the breadcrumbs through this conversation, I'm seeing two big threads. The first one being the ability to judge risk correctly. And the second would be, I guess, a mindset of thinking outside the box. My understanding from this, and this is what I want to pose to you, is are there strategies within those two, risk-taking and thinking outside the box? I'm assuming that there are going to be some strategies within there that we can leverage that may be fairly straightforward, that, it may not be the path to the unicorn's lair, but it may be something that we can follow to at least accelerate, as you said, that growth potential.
Yeah, so I think, if there was a blueprint, as you say, then, unicorns wouldn't be unicorns, would they? They'd be fairly commonplace. And so the fact that they do carry this badge of honor says that they're as rare as rocking horse shit, and nothing could be more true. So, we talk about think outside the box. I, as you'll gather from me, Jonathan, I quite like some ways of describing things from a slightly different angle. I would argue, because I live down in southeast Spain, think outside, no box required. Is pretty good. That helps to stimulate things. Coming back to the serious side of the questions that you're asking, anybody that's watching this that's got their own business and they've started it from scratch, the last thing you should do with your idea, in my humble opinion, is go and sit with an accountant and ask them to give you the risk assessment of whether this idea is going to go. Because if you look at risk, you will fail. The people that succeed, yes, are aware of the risk, but they see past it. They are solutions orientated. If a brick wall comes in front of them, they'll work a way to go over it, around it, or even dig away under it. And that's what separates, I think, the average entrepreneur from the really serious people that go there. You know, we go back to Ben. You know, he had a passion. He knew what he wanted to do. And, you know, at one stage, as most 19-year-olds do, he's running a number of hustles on the side in order to keep the lights on and food on the table. And, you know, the press love that kind of story. So, you know, the headlines in the UK are, you know, former pizza delivery boy makes it good as a unicorn. Risk is always there. It's always there in any business. It's there in anything you do. The minute you step outside your house, there's a risk that somebody could run over you. You know, so the risk element is there. I think entrepreneurs do have this innate skill that they're prepared to do the things that other people perhaps aren't prepared to do. And we mentioned this in the last podcast. And, you know, 97% of the population prefer the comfort, security of a job. And there is nothing wrong with that, because if we didn't have that, then no matter how great our ideas, we wouldn't really be able to deliver, execute, and manage them. It's the 3% that really are prepared to do the things that others aren't. You know, my life savings, my mortgage, and everything else has been on the line many times over, to the extent that today I have learned to manage the risk greater. So when a bank asks me for personal guarantees, I'll find another way around it. And most of the people watching this will probably relate to some of those views that, you know, what we'll do is, as a bank, we can see that there's no risk, so we'll lend you the money that you don't really need. Well, actually, I really need the money now, and there is a lot of risk. And if it comes off, then, you know, there's a huge upside for both of us. Well, banks don't work in that way. Entrepreneurs do. And I'm pretty sure that as VCs have put money into Gymshark now, there's a lot of them wishing that they'd have had the opportunity to be able to do that. Go and speak to 19-year-old Ben about somebody putting in that kind of cash instead of him doing pizza deliveries, and he would have snapped your hands off. So yeah, thinking outside the box is one, but you know, it's the ability to really see past the risk, acknowledge the risk, but actually understand how to deliver it, and yeah, think outside. No box required.
Stephen's made a couple of excellent points there. One I'd like to pick up on is this whole aspect of being able to live outside your comfort zone, because I think most entrepreneurs trying to build any business, but particularly big business, are probably going to have to spend a significant amount of time outside of what might previously have been their comfort zone, because salary has to go on pause while you reinvest every last penny into the business. And that really creates an unusual situation where you're taking your own powers of self-belief to extraordinary places perhaps you never thought you'd go. Some of these things are things I touch on in the book. They're more about personal feelings and experiences and emotions than they are about business decisions. But essentially, we can only really grow as human beings in uncomfortable places. And entrepreneurialism is merely just one aspect of being a human being. And guess what? It's the same rules apply. You know, if you want to grow as an entrepreneur, you have to be in uncomfortable situations, situations you've never been in before, situations that you do not have a manual for, and then you fight fires to get your way out of those holes. And the best entrepreneurs have an innate capability to solve problems, fight fires, bring other people with them through those challenging situations, even if they themselves are carrying personal risk that is beyond what most people could consider to be a kind of normal situation. Most people like to have some understanding of what salary is coming into the bank for the next quarter, the next 6 months, the next 12 months. very few entrepreneurs in startup mode can really have that level of certainty. And so we tend to get used to living outside of that situation. It would drive some people crazy and probably leads to a lot of relationship splits because some people can't handle that level of uncertainty.
I'm actually quite curious when you bring up risk and, really shattering that comfort zone, particularly, and obviously there might be nuances according to the industry here, but in this post-COVID world where every sort of industry has been turned upside down, how might an SME have to adapt, or what kind of different, how might they have to reframe things if they want to get to that unicorn status?
Okay, so that's a pretty broad question, but actually also quite an insightful one. And I've got a sort of number of views on that, and they probably sit around two ways of looking at what it is that you could possibly do. These two things for me tend to be fairly constant, and I'll give you some tangible examples in a moment. But the two things to have a real good think about is in business, you've got an opportunity and you've identified what that opportunity is. And then the other element of that opportunity is timing. And sometimes you can have an absolutely fantastic opportunity, but the timing just isn't right for you to be able to deliver it. So in a previous podcast, I mentioned that I was fortunate enough to grow the 5th largest email marketing company in the UK purely by accident. And to get the story on that, you need to view the previous podcast. But as a result of growing that business, we started to leverage into other areas which really helped us to scale the business and create recurring revenues. And that was into the sort of the data warehousing, data intelligence, data insights side of things. Out of all of that also popped yet another opportunity for us where we developed some fairly interesting, unique technology. And in order to be able to maximize the value out of the data intelligence that we were bringing in on behalf of our clients. And for two of these marketing communication solutions, we actually gained 2 global patents for them. And never made a penny from them, by the way. And that's one of the reasons why I talk about opportunity and timing. So one of the products that we developed was something back in the day called an interactive store window. So if you're on the high street and you're going to a store, and at the moment you'll see mannequins or you'll see posters on a store window. And it occurred to me that actually if you could deliver that message in digital format, but also encourage people to stop and interact with the store window, you could actually get them to maybe come inside the store that they hadn't really thought about coming inside before. But also, if you made it fun and interactive enough, maybe they would part with some personal information, maybe a mobile phone number, maybe an email address, in exchange for them getting something back from said retailer. And we filed the patent and got the patent and won it on a global basis. Not a cheap thing to do, I might add, before people go rushing off thinking, let's just go and secure our IP around a patent. But we managed to secure it for one thing that you probably look at today and go, wow, how did you get away with that? Well, you've got to go back in the day when most people didn't sort of connect the fact that if somebody was doing things on the interactive store window, and there's a demonstration of it on my YouTube page, Stephen Sumner, by the way, and you can see how we developed that technology. What we were trying to do was encourage you as a passerby or as a consumer to ask for information. So could either send you a digital version of a brochure or a catalogue, or ask you to set up an appointment to do a variety of different things. And we wanted a global pattern simply because nobody at the time had thought about passing data down through the internet to do this. But more importantly, because nobody had thought about collecting that information and passing it back to a central point. Oh, pretty standard stuff today, but there you go. That was opportunity. It was also opportunity and timing for a patent. The second patent that we got was one of those solutions that got delivered to you from the interactive store window was in fact an interactive mail order brochure. You know, the page turning things that you've probably seen some time ago. And we got the patent approved again for that on the same basis that, yes, the page turning thing had been around for quite some time, but nobody had really taken mail order brochures, cut them into digital pieces, reassembled them in a format that people could not only interact with, but also we captured what is the equivalent of analytics data that Google have been doing for quite some time, very early on. And so we got the patent approved for that. So that was fantastic, you know, opportunity, timing. Unfortunately, the timing wasn't quite as clever as we assumed, because this is back in 2003, 2004. And at the time in the UK, over 90% of homes and quite a lot of businesses were still on dial-up. And what we were doing took up quite a lot of bandwidth. So the end result was, whilst we were getting very excited and animated about the fact that this is really just going to take us off into the stratosphere, and our business was called the Marketing Innovation Group, so we had to live up to our name. The reality was that the experience from a user perspective was pretty poor, simply because of the lack of bandwidth on that. So opportunity was there, the timing was there to a certain extent, but actually the timing held us back because we were too far ahead of where the market was. So sometimes you can trip yourself up in that particular way. But, you know, I think most savvy entrepreneurs, savvy business people, you know, recognize that thoughts do become things. We wouldn't have landed on the moon, for those that believe that we did land on the moon. I do. We wouldn't realize that the earth is in fact round and it isn't flat without somebody wanting to achieve that. So there's lots of reasons why we call them entrepreneurs today, but these are innovative people who are aware of the risk but are actually prepared to do the things that lots of other people probably consider the risk too big. And I applaud people like that. And as I mentioned before, Ben at Gymshark's done very, very well, but you know, you could probably go and find quite a lot of Bens that are out there at some stage of their development, learning and growth curve. Not everybody's going to be a unicorn, and not everybody wants to be a unicorn. Some people just want to grow their business to a stage where it creates multi-generational wealth, i.e. money that's left over after you've sold your business to look after your children, their children and their children. That's multi-generational wealth. That for me has always been a goal, primarily because I came from a very poor working class background. So my driver, as people have often asked me, why are you so obsessed with money? It isn't money that I'm obsessed with. I'm obsessed with poverty because I know what that's like. I've been there. Something
I'd like to add to what Stephen was saying there, that I've certainly picked up from my experience as an investor in Fabify, which, as you know, John, is a platform to connect significant global fashion brands with cost-conscious consumers by allowing consumers to buy online product at significant discounts without ever mentioning the brand, which obviously protects brand equity that brands invest a lot of money in. What's clear to me is that for businesses in this B2C space at least, you're constantly looking to create a better rapport relationship with the consumer. And the one thing that's different now to even just a few years ago is that billions of people on the planet are now connected up on mobile devices and sitting on social media platforms. And so how we interact with that audience will be critical to our success. And that can equally apply in B2B as it applies in B2C, because the business that Stephen was referring to earlier, he and I will be reaching out to owner managers of SMEs globally, initially SMEs with sales up to about 50 million. So how many of those are there? 25, 30 million entrepreneurs in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm speculating North America, Latin America, UK, Europe. That's a lot of entrepreneurs in our target market. And whether we're B2B or B2C, what we're really trying to persuade our targets to do is to repeat purchase, to keep coming back. And that's a lot to do with creating trust. And if you think about why Stephen created his business, the one he referred to right at the beginning of this podcast, it was a lot to do with the intrusive adverts that he was experiencing, and the thought that surely it wasn't right that advertisers were wasting valuable seconds, minutes, even hours of our life over time, exposing us to ads that we didn't really want to see. And so I think another aspect of building a successful business in 2020 and beyond is going to be creating a credible, long-term, trusting relationship with your audience, whether it's B2B audience or a B2C audience.
You're right. I think I was looking online about that. According to, I think, Clario, they say that the average person sees 5,000 ads per day. That's unreal when you actually think about the amount. I mean, if I were to sit here and count to 5,000, it would take me forever, and to imagine that we're bombarded so heavily with this. And so I think that's actually a great sort of transition point there. I think because to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying there, Stephen, I think you're right. And I think every savvy entrepreneur, every entrepreneur who's actually taken risks and put themselves out there knows thoughts become things. When you're in that negative, framework, things tend to happen that are not very, most of the time, fairly negative. And, conversely, when you're, maybe not, standing out in the garden saying there's no weeds, but at least, hey, damn, I can pull those weeds if I want to, and I can make this world a better place if I want to, that's, that type of thinking pattern. And so I think my question, that I would love to hear both of your thoughts are on this is how do you develop that type of thinking process that can look at these situations like being hammered 5,000 times a day and through that irritation, see an opportunity through that, that thing that maybe is not even an irritation at a conscious level because we've become so accustomed to it, right? We all, I don't even think about it anymore. But I guess what I'm saying is how do you train and develop your mind to see opportunity and to see the value that potentially could be there and could be created? Great
question. So I've got, as you would expect, a few views on that. So we'll sort of reverse engineer that the way that you've asked that question, and I'll go into what I teased with before, which is how we've looked at solving what I think is a global problem in the media space. So to answer your question, how do you identify those opportunities? Well, I don't think that you can hand that skill over to somebody. I think it comes back to the point I was making before. It's an innate skill. You either have it or you don't. It sort of falls into that rather awkward, is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? If you're an entrepreneur, you've got a glass, go and sell it. Let somebody else fill it up. Yeah, so that's the sort of mindset that I think that you have to deal with. And the great entrepreneurs really sort of operate in that space. You talked about the fact that on average we're seeing 5,000 digital adverts a day, and when you mention that to people, they can't believe it because it's really not. Well, it depends on how much time you're spending on devices like this. But also, I mentioned that there's 60% of the population of the world on social media today. 67% are carrying around a mobile phone. 15 years ago, it was probably businessmen and somebody who was pretty affluent that would have had a mobile phone. A mobile phone now, it's a fairly ubiquitous piece of kit to have. And what happened is that as the internet arrived, people needed to, a bit like your local library's opened up, it needs lots of books. Otherwise, it's not very a library, it's just a reference point to go to. And so as the internet came on board, who were the guys with all the content? Well, the guys that were publishing magazines and newspapers and various other things. And guess how their business model worked? You went and bought your newspaper in the morning or your magazine and you put up with all those adverts that were in all of the newspapers. You probably never even sat and counted how many adverts you actually saw. So what had happened was the mentality associated with the publishing industry just followed the same advertising mentality online. And then you got all sorts of tech innovations, programmatic, and that made marketing departments become the bullhorn of the company rather than the innovation marketing people that they're supposed to be. And the stats do waver between 5,000 and 7,000 digital intrusions on a daily basis. And it got ramped up primarily because of programmatic. And for those that don't know what programmatic is it's basically a bit of technology that allows you to, a publisher on the one side to say, I've got all of these audiences, do you want access to them? And advertisers on the other side saying, yes, I want access to them, here's what I'll pay you. In broad terms, that's basically how programmatic works. But what it does is it operates machine gun style. And so it can fire thousands and thousands of adverts out. And my view is that programmatic has probably been the worst thing that happened to the media industry since the internet arrived. So a lot of people would argue the opposite and say, well, it's actually made us far more agile and, it's created a fairer playing field. I have the view that because it's a machine gun focused approach, the fact that you can deliver shit at 1,000,000 miles an hour doesn't change the fact that when it arrives, it's still shit. So that thinking is what's led us to sort of where we are today. And if you have watched the previous podcast, you'll know that one of the main things that I've been doing for quite some time since I sold my businesses was I started doing a few favors for some friends and some mates who wanted to pick my brains. Before long, I knew that I'd created a consultancy business. I didn't think about it as a consultancy business until somebody started to offer me some silly money, and I thought, we better make this a fairly serious thing. I am an out-of-the-box thinker. I'm pretty creative. I'm pretty commercial. And one of the clients that I was working with 7 years ago now was a company who operate in the States and as well as the UK and a number of countries in Europe. And they're the number one third-party seller on Amazon and eBay around the globe by a country mile. And what they do is they buy, back in the day, they bought your old media, so your old CDs, DVDs, and all of the other, all that sort of stuff. They bring them back to their central point, refurbish them and stick them straight onto eBay and Amazon and make a little bit of a profit. And that was great. And they launched their business just before the financial crash, 2006, 2007. And I'll come back to why timing is important and why we're creating unicorns in the midst of a COVID pandemic and a huge global crisis. It comes back to that glass analogy that I mentioned earlier. You can focus on whether it's half full or half empty. I just saw the glass and thought, how can I go and sell that to somebody else who's desperately in need of a glass? So they created this business in 2006, 2007. Then the financial crash happened. People were losing jobs, they were losing houses and so on, and they needed to raise cash quickly. So one of the things that they started to sell was their old media CDs. And so these guys built a fairly huge business off the back of it. Once you do that, you get to a stage at some point where private equity or the VCs, they want a slice of this pie. And so they put some money in. The guys thought at that stage that they could continue to grow their business because of the way they grew it previously. They got free publicity. People were finding them as opposed to them having to go find the others. So they created this model, and they decided to extend the model to then go and buy your own clothes. And I'm not going to go into how that turned out to be a disaster for them. But at the same time as innovating what they thought was a great leverage strategy, they also chose to launch themselves into the US market. Cut a very long story short, the business very quickly started to implode. I was asked to go and have a look at the business on behalf of private equity guys that had put the money in. I looked at the business, did a full forensic review from top to bottom, bottom to top, and then looked at how we could start to grow the business. The good news is we did grow the business. It's now extremely profitable. It's trading extremely well in the US. They're now not buying CDs, DVDs, and games. They're now buying your old mobile phone, iPads, and technology, because that's the next wave that I'd identified for them as an opportunity, but leverage what they'd already got. Throughout that process, I had to do some really detailed forensic work because they were spending fairly considerable amounts of cash on TV advertising and on digital advertising through the internet. And during that process, I picked up some fairly interesting things, and I'm going back 7 years ago, that really started to get me thinking. And again, excuse me referring back to it, is this half full, half empty, where's the glass type of thing. And I could see at that stage 3 very, very clear trends that was going on. And that created a bit of an itch that needed scratching. And the 3 trends that I identified was the innovation back in the early 2000s by TiVo to allow you and me to record and play back any program that we wanted to watch at a time of our choosing. By default, what they hadn't really considered was what they were almost doing was killing the goose that was laying the golden egg, i.e. the advertising egg, because all of a sudden we could skip past all those adverts. So that was number 1. People were skipping adverts more than they'd done before. So you're throwing a lot of money at TV advertising and maybe you're not getting the response and the results that you're expecting. The second was the growth, primarily at that stage through desktops, of ad blockers. And the fact that you could just deploy this little script onto your browser and it would free you up from a lot of these digital intrusions, as I call them. And interesting when I go and talk to businesses that still think that this is the way forward, and I'm with the chief exec or the leadership team in a business, the first thing I ask them when we get together is, can you tell me the last 3 digital adverts that you saw today? And from the ones that you saw, what did you do? And of course, they all just go, well, we can't remember any of those digital adverts. So you might get a smart guy in the corner, oh yeah, I remember the car advert. Well, did you do anything about it? Well, no, I didn't. And my answer is, well, if you can't remember them and you didn't do anything with them, why are you expecting other people to do things differently than you? So that for me was a huge behavioral change and shift. And then there was something that had been looming in the background in Europe for quite some time, but was due to become a reality and actually came to fruition in 2018, which was GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which basically said the Wild West of using our personal data has got to stop. And that's exactly what happened. Ad skipping, ad blocking, and then the rise of GDPR, which basically blew a big hole in the face of digital advertising, because now they couldn't use our personal data and our browsing data willy-nilly. There were regulations that were very strict, and initially when it was launched, People in the US thought it didn't apply to them, but they wanted to do business over in Europe. They suddenly very quickly found out that it did. So I focus on behavior, and I could see the behavior of all of us going in one direction, which was advertising has just become a commodity. The days of great advertising didn't seem to be around anymore. And the fact that we can create very low cost, low quality adverts and get them to people a lot quicker was doing the one thing that I knew I'd already evidenced, which was it was just pissing more and put more people off. And so they were switching off that particular medium. So that was great. I identified what the problem was. The challenge that I had was I didn't really know what the solution was. And so, as I mentioned before, once I've got an itch, I've got to scratch it. And armed with all this information, I went to see the top 5 global media agencies, both in Europe and in the US. Had some interesting days up and down Madison Avenue with Ogilvy and others, and effectively validated that it was in fact for them the elephant in the room. And they recognized that for years they'd peddled their wares on this creativity and the fact that they can create these adverts that will get your brand front and center of consumers. And now they were very, very worried that that model was starting to implode. So that for me was sufficient evidence to show and support my view that there was a huge problem, and wherever there's a huge problem, there's a huge opportunity. And so I continued to pursue that, and then went and started to talk to some fairly big brands in the space that previously were spending a lot of money in this area, and they were also echoing the same sentiments that they weren't getting the level of returns that they were previously. And I'll give you a very quick synopsis of where we've got to 6 to 7 years later. So this is the first of the unicorns that we've created. So what we did was I looked at how to solve this particular problem. And I think I mentioned to you early on in the podcast that by accident, we're actually taking on Amazon, Google, and YouTube. And the reason we're doing that is that if you're an Amazon Prime customer, you can go over to Amazon, you can watch your movie, you can watch your TV show, you want to find out about some of the people, locations, and various other things that's in that movie or that TV show. They acquired a company called IMDb a few years ago, Internet Media Database, a company that's been around since the early 90s. And that basically is what serves you the information when you want to know about an actor, an actress, the location. And a lot of that is user-generated content. And so that just feeds your curiosity. But inevitably, once you've fed that curiosity, there may be something in that movie that Bond was wearing that suit or that watch, or maybe you were watching Sex and the City and the girls quite like the dress or the hotel that they stayed at when they went to the Middle East. And you want to do something about that. Well, there's good old Amazon looking after you, because what they'll do is plug you directly into their product catalog. And so that TV show, that movie has just become a huge advert for Amazon's product catalog. So that was the kernel of the idea to solve the problem, because I recognized that it wasn't in Amazon's interest to allow that technology to spread outside the Amazon Prime ecosystem. And what was more important for them was to own that space. So I took the view that if I could build something that would replicate all of those capabilities, all of that functionality, and hand it over to the likes of Netflix, Disney Plus, Sky, Comcast, all these other people that are creating and producing and licensing some great content, and give them the ability to be able to monetize it, that would be a pretty neat solution to a huge global problem. But that wasn't enough for me. I needed to go one step further than that. And what I recognized is that when I looked at YouTube's model had grown off the back of a lot of user-generated content in the first instance. Over the years, the quality of a lot of that content has improved, a bit like the stuff that you're watching now. And people are wanting to access more and more information as a result of it. And Google acquired YouTube back in 2005, I think it was, with a purpose for it to become the second largest visual search engine next to Google, which it's now become. So you either go to Google to search for something from a movie or a live TV show that you've been watching, and Google get the benefit of all that traffic, they get the benefit of all the sales that come off the back of it, but they don't go back to Disney or Sky or Netflix and say, you know, thanks for sending us all this traffic, all this data. By the way, we just made $250,000 in sales off some of the products that we managed to move on, and there's your slice. So I thought that was a bit of an injustice. What our platform does is it allows people who are creating content that is similar or enhances the content that you're already watching. So if you're watching a live sports event, be it soccer, basketball, baseball, cricket, there's a huge fan base out there that have got some kind of opinion, but they're also creating some fairly fun, interesting content. Not quite as fun as TikTok, but nonetheless, they are creating content. Our platform allows their content to be sat at the side of that live TV program, that movie, that TV show box set that you've just been consuming. And by unicorn magic, we can monetize all of that content and share it with everybody. So it's the new order for the new way of doing things, and that's sort of where we're at. And as a result of that, we've been able to, for another podcast, perhaps another day, tell you about the other two unicorns that's been incubated off the back of that particular business model.
John, a couple of thoughts that struck me. I'm sure you follow yourself from time to time Bob Proctor in the US, but I was listening or watching a video of Bob's back in November, and of course I had my investment in Babify, and funny enough, point Stephen's just raising, the COVID pandemic, of course, is shifting more buying online, and it's definitely creating more fashion overstock. So we're beneficiaries, I guess, in terms of our business model of this pandemic. But it's not something I'm sort of rubbing my hands in glee about. It's just a reality of the situation we find ourselves in. But there I was back in October, November, and it really comes back to something Stephen was saying earlier on another podcast I was watching, is that money itself doesn't create happiness. And even if Babify is a success and I get an investment success out of it, there I was back in October, November last year, trying to figure out what was I actually going to do for the rest of my life. Because just hanging around spending that money was definitely not going to make me happy. And in this video I was watching, Bob was referring to the fact that every great idea begins in the subconscious. And it threw me back to a great idea that I'd had 10 years earlier, actually, which, as you'll see in the book, was screwed by a rather inefficient, shall we say, regulator just a few days before a planned IPO. But that's a whole different story. And it led me to think, well, if I've done this before, surely I can do it again. And just a few days later, a friend of mine mentioned that he'd noticed that a couple of guys, Dan Pina's one of them, were making a lot of money advising people online about how you buy and sell businesses. But I knew that being in some form of education online really wasn't going to be interesting to me. It wasn't going to float my boat. But it did lead me to thinking a few days later when I noticed a LinkedIn broadcast by a guy called Jonathan Cross mentioning that over 90% of brokered SME exits were failing. I thought, well, hang on a second, here's an opportunity. that is relevant to me. Here's something I do know something about. That led me to set up Exit Valhalla. But at the beginning, Exit Valhalla was a bit of a one-trick pony idea around how do we help businesses to exit, when actually, if we can help businesses to grow, you're relevant to every single SME in the world. And that's really when I started talking to Stephen about getting involved with the new business that we're forming to try and help every SME accelerate their growth. And of course, one of the things we've done to reach out to SME owner managers is to create these series of podcasts, because just hitting them with random adverts in social media platforms probably isn't going to be very appealing to people. Whereas if they can find some content that they engage with and listen to the way our brains work and the way we solve problems, we've got a much better chance of convincing SME owner managers that we can help them wrestling with whatever issues they're facing today, tomorrow, to grow their businesses more quickly. And I think, when it comes back to the question you're asking, how do we recognize these light bulb moments that are going on in our subconscious? You have to be in a rational place. You have to be rationally sifting through the quality of those ideas, because not every idea that appears as a light bulb in your brain is a good one. And you also have to connect it with your passion, something we were talking about with Ben Francis earlier, weren't we, with Gymshark. My passion has always been around collaborating with owner managers of SMEs. I spent over 20 years in private equity doing just that. So if you can connect your passion with an opportunity, and now I was watching a movie about Steve Jobs last night, and one of the great quotes from that is, opportunity exists where consumers are experiencing pain. And in the case of SME owner managers, they're experiencing pain right now, generating more revenues. And I think we can help them with that.
At the heart and the soul of what both of you are saying on this, it really comes down to asking the right question. What's the best kind of question to ask that's going to help uncover the value in the problem? It's going to help uncover the opportunity in that problem, in that pain. I can see some of the patterns here that you're saying, okay, we want to identify what's happening now, what's the data, what's the numbers, what are the trends, where are we going, what's the behavioral shift, what are the changes there, and then look for solutions. But I guess that third piece to that, of finding those solutions, are there questions that you ask, that you tend to ask, or that you see others asking that really mine the biggest chunks and the biggest bars of gold out of them, their hills? Over to you on that.
So forgive the oversimplified response to this. I'm a simple guy at heart, and I like simple answers to what clearly sometimes are complex problems. So let me give you an example, and hopefully everybody that's watching or listening to this podcast will instantly relate to. If you've grown up enough, you bought a car. Before you bought your car, you started thinking about your car. How many of the cars that you were thinking about did you immediately start to see as you were driving around in your old car? Maybe you went from a Chevy to a Mercedes, and all of a sudden you're seeing Mercedes all over the place. Next minute you're going, I don't like that colour Mercedes, I really like that colour Mercedes. All of a sudden you're seeing the same sort of colour Mercedes. And you're now becoming the guy or the girl that's sort of siding up to somebody on the freeway or the highway and slow it down so that you can take a closer peek inside and all of that sort of stuff. That's what we call cognitive tuning. You're not aware of the fact that you're doing it, but all of a sudden, because you are looking for something, you're tuned into it, you're more likely to see those opportunities. And I think, as we said before, not every opportunity is going to result in value creation. Because if you don't have the skill set, resource that you can leverage to deliver it, then you're probably best just moving on. So as much as some of us might like to go and drive a car at NASCAR, you know, do you have the skill set? You know, have you got enough tight butt cheeks to be able to do it, I suppose? So it's basically, it's understanding that at a simple level. You know, it is identifying. If you're focused on stuff that you think are really important to you, you will see those opportunities. So Mike alluded to Bob Proctor before, and you know, I believe in the philosophy of what The Secret talks about. I believe in the philosophy of the universe. Do I believe it at a tangible level? No, the universe ain't going to come and save you. If you're in the shit, you're in the shit. You're the only person that can get you out of it. But the principles behind The Secret are fairly straightforward. You receive what you give out. And if you're looking for opportunities, chances are you're going to find those opportunities. The trick then is to be able to filter through those opportunities to see what it is that you can do to help deliver those, either ahead of somebody else doing it and then better than somebody else doing it. And in my case, with the business that we set up, I didn't set out to disrupt Amazon. I didn't set out to disrupt Google. I certainly didn't set out to disrupt YouTube. That's been the byproduct of solving the problem. And as much as you know, there's a significant, sizable population on Amazon and go to Amazon, they're only going there because where else do they go? There isn't an alternative solution. So provide people with an alternative solution. And our platform is free to content owners, publishers, and media owners, because they've got the audiences. If you produce great content, it's also free to you, because what we want to do is encourage you to put your content onto that platform so that your content is sat next to a Star Wars movie if you're a Star Wars fan. The platform basically just takes all of that and monetizes it, and you'll get your share. Something that Amazon don't do, because Amazon want you to pay. And also, interestingly, Amazon are still following an outdated advertising model that was designed in the 20th century by a business that was really come alive and grow in the 21st century, doing some fantastic things and setting some very high benchmarks for everybody, yet still moving along on an ancient advertising model where most of us are saying we're not interested. So opportunity is there where you look for it, in my experience, and you should always trust that judgment, because your innate bias will move you towards the things that you believe that you've got an interest in, and that you believe that you can solve some of those problems. And I reiterate, I am not sitting here advocating that every business should become unicorns. It might not be possible in terms of scale, but probably more importantly, it might not be what you as an individual want to do. You know, you might want to sort of grow a business to a certain size, create sufficient value around that exit, and that is something that Mike and I very much collaborate and agree on, which is one of the reasons we're setting up this new company, not just to create an exit value, but to actually help SMEs understand how to better to grow, scale, and actually create recurring revenues. And we just felt that it was important that if we collaborated both of our skill sets, along with others that are joining us on the journey, that we're going to create a huge opportunity in a space that at the moment is pretty clear water. Now, there are people out there that say it's clear water for logical reasons. There's, you know, it's too hard to do, nobody wants to go there. I think we mentioned about whether the water was half full or half empty before. I see the glass, and there's a glass that people should be looking for now to to grow their business and to scale the business. And you know, talking to, meeting and watching stuff like this is how you grow. It's how you learn. And I applaud anybody that takes time out of the day to educate themselves, because if you're not growing every day, you're not learning. And the only way you're going to learn is by making mistakes. And sometimes it's very useful to talk to people who know what not to do.
Well, just following up what Stephen's just said there, one opportunity that exists for every SME right now, I'm absolutely convinced, is bolt-on acquisitions. Because the price of companies, generally speaking, is probably lower now than it has been for some time. I'm speaking generally, obviously it varies sector by sector, but the opportunity to acquire now is probably greater than it's been in any of our lifetimes. And that means there's an opportunity to create value. And one of the reasons why this particular space that Steve and I are collaborating in is interesting to me is because it is actually quite fragmented. There's plenty of consulting businesses already out there, particularly in the US, providing consulting services to SMEs. I'm not saying we're going to go out and acquire all of them, but I think some of those businesses will be owner managed. Most of those businesses actually will be owner managed, and many of them will be interested in being part of a larger group which is working on a more international basis, looking to package up software as a service to reach out to SMEs, perhaps globally, which we plan to do by leveraging the contacts and connections of a global consultancy that we're talking to, who already have consultants working with SMEs all over the world. So just as we see opportunity in buy and build, there'll be opportunity for most entrepreneurs right now in buy and build. But, you know, it's not for widows and orphans. You know, acquisitions are just as dangerous as unicorns. And, you know, you can just as easily end up with blood on the carpet as a success. So you've got to do your due diligence right. You've got to do your wooing right, make sure you're talking to the right companies in the first place. And you've got to get your pricing right, and you've got to get your deal structuring right. But if you do all of those things, there's value creation opportunities out there for everybody right now, probably on a greater level than there's been in the last 25, 30 years.
Yeah, thanks once again for the invite. It's been a blast. I've enjoyed it as usual.
Same here. Always. Amazing.
And I just hope it does, you know, if it helps just one business, one person out there, then we've done a good result today.
Yeah, likewise. I think we've covered a lot of ground. Thanks, John. Great questions as ever. And I think there's lots of food for thought there.
Well, fabulous, guys. Amazing. So listen, to all of you out there, owners, managers of SMEs, I know who you are. I know you guys. Okay. You guys are aggressive. You guys know what you want, but you're also humble, and you know that you can't get there alone. Okay. You need to be surrounding yourself, as they say, make war in a multiplicity of counselors. And so if you have that desire to exit your SME and you want to do this successfully, if you want to grow your SME and you want to do that successfully, you want to remove the guesswork out of that equation, go to exitvalhalla.com, reach out to Mike, reach out to Mr. Stephen Sumner here as well. Both of their LinkedIn profiles will be in the description below. If you want to bring Stephen into your business as well, you know, take a look at, you know, what he's got on LinkedIn, review what he's got. He's got so much content both on his LinkedIn and on his YouTube. Just go explore it as well, guys. Again, both to you, gentlemen, I want to say thank you so much for making this so much fun. It's been a blast, for adding so much value. And really, I think the biggest piece for me is for revealing the secrets that have cost you so much time, energy, and resource to get there. And you're helping all of us by cutting the learning curve. And we're grateful, and we're excited to begin to take these ideas and implement. So thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure. Can't wait for the next one around.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Cheers.